We're very excited to welcome you today. My name is Maria Thacker-Gothi. I am a co-founder and secretary for the Life Sciences Workforce Collaborative, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the Collaborative's very first Best Workforce Strategies Roundtable. Thank you again for joining us today and for making time for a conversation that continues to rise to the top across policy, industry, and education on how we build a workforce that can keep pace with growth and the promise of the life sciences. This roundtable marks the kickoff of a new quarterly series we'll be hosting, and it's designed to move beyond just high-level discussions and focus on what's actually working and how national policy translates into real workforce action at the state, regional, and industry levels. Today's conversation is intentionally tight and focused, and we'll begin with a national policy perspective, then hear directly from organizations that are implementing workforce solutions on the ground. We're grateful to have such a strong group of leaders and practitioners here with us today, in addition to an outstanding audience, and we're looking forward to an engaging and practical discussion. So before we dive into that discussion, I just want to take a moment to level set on who the Life Sciences Workforce Collaborative is, particularly those of you who may be joining for the first time. The Collaborative is a national grassroots network of over 50 life sciences industry associations and institutes from across the U.S. and Puerto Rico. Our focus is workforce development across the life sciences, from biomanufacturing and biotech to medtech and emerging bioindustrial sectors. Importantly, the Collaborative's role is not to duplicate the excellent work happening in states and regions, but rather to connect, align, and elevate best practices and to serve as a bridge between national policy conversations and local implementation. The Roundtable series really reflects this mission. It's designed as a space for shared learning where policy, industry, education, and workforce leaders can really learn from one another, better align, connect, and build around practical solutions. So with that context, I'm really pleased to move into today's conversation. And thank you again to all of our collaborators. So we're fortunate to kick off today to be joined by leaders who are shaping the future of the life sciences workforce from both a national policy and implementation perspective. I'm pleased to begin by introducing Caitlin Frazer, who will kick us off with the national policy context for today's conversation. Caitlin serves as Executive Director for the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology, where she leads the Commission's work advising Congress on issues at the intersection of biotechnology, national security, and economic competitiveness. Prior to joining the Commission, Caitlin held senior policy roles on Capitol Hill, including serving as Legislative Director to Senator Jon Ossoff, advising members of Congress on national security, intelligence, and foreign affairs issues. She has also served in the U.S. State Department and brings deep experience navigating how policy decisions translate into real-world impact. Today, Caitlin will share some insights on the Commission's workforce recommendations and the national roadshows and help us set the table for how policy priorities are shaping the workforce needs across the country. Caitlin, we're really grateful for your leadership and for joining us today. So over to you.
Great. Well, Maria, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. And I'm happy to kick us off, but I'm most excited to hear from John, Linnea, and Hunter. I'm joined today by Anmei Zhang, who is a policy advisor on the Commission and the leader of our workforce work. And Anmei's going to help me drive the slides, but she's also going to help us answer questions and is a great point of contact for those who want to follow up. So thank you, Anmei. The National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology was created about 3 years ago by Congress with the knowledge and anticipation of the need for Congress to legislate at the intersection of biotechnology, national security, and economic prosperity. Congress has a history of creating advisory boards like ours to help with complicated technological policy issues that draw in different aspects of our economy and different aspects of the federal government. In essence, our goal was to create recommendations to prepare the United States government for leadership in the age of biology. Next slide. One of the things that we determined early was that biomanufacturing is key to reviving manufacturing in every state in this nation. I think there has been a fundamental misunderstanding of biotechnology here in Washington as something that happens just in Boston or in the Bay Area. And we know, this group knows, that that is not the case. But one of the things that the Commission sought to highlight through its findings and action plan was the enormous potential for emerging biotechnology to power a new form or a renewed form of manufacturing that could generate economic opportunity and job creation all across our country. Next slide. The Commission finalized its major report and action plan to Congress in April of last year. We made 49 recommendations to Congress, all of which we think need to be implemented. But for purposes of today's discussion, I am going to focus on what we had to say about preparing the biotechnology workforce of the future. But maybe just to take a quick step back and say that the Commission assessed that although the United States has enjoyed decades of leadership in biotechnology, I mean, in many ways, biotech is an American invention. We are at real risk of losing that leading edge to other countries, particularly to China. And there are a bunch of different dynamics at play in how we made that assessment. We looked at things like federal government policy, strategy, and coordination. We looked at the ways that the government regulates biotechnology products that are moving from lab to consumer. We looked at things like capital investment, not just in early stage research, but also in scale up and commercialization, and where some of those gaps were that the federal government could help fill. A major component of our work, and one of the areas where we have been most successful thus far, was thinking about the applications of biotechnology for national security, in which we include supply chain resiliency as a component part of that. And Congress has already seized on many of the recommendations that we made in that space. But again, what I think is probably most interesting to this group is to understand how essential we found workforce issues and the talent pipeline to be, so much so that of the 6 chapters of our action plan, talent is one of the key pillars. And time again, our bipartisan commissioners came back to the people, the human capital, the people dynamic that has historically powered, and we believe will continue to power American leadership in biotechnology. As you see on our slide, we made 3 key findings related to workforce issues. One was a little bit introspective in thinking about the ways that the United States government is postured in terms of personnel. We assessed that there was a lack of enduring technical expertise in Congress. The Commission, of course, was designed to help fill that gap, but we are a temporary organization by design. And so we recognize the need for more steady, enduring technical expertise to advise our policymakers. We also assessed a lack of widespread bioliteracy across the US federal workforce. And by that, we mean not just the need to recruit and retain biotechnology subject matter experts, technical experts into the federal workforce, which we firmly believe in, but also the need to raise the level of understanding of biotechnology among our senior leaders, people who we don't expect to be deep technical experts, but we do need to teach and expect them to have some level of conversationality in this technology area if we are to make smart policy decisions for the future. And then finally, a poor understanding of future biotechnology workforce needs across the federal government and really across states and regions, and subsequently a lack of pipeline, gaps in our pipelines for preparing that workforce of the future. Slide. We made a series of recommendations, which if you haven't had a chance to look at the Commission's report, you can find it at biotech.senate.gov, and all of the workforce recommendations are contained in Chapter 5. But they are, as you see here, how do we equip the United States government, federal government, to be more bio-ready and bio-literate? How can the federal government support job creation across the United States at all skill levels, and what can we do to attract, vet, and retain foreign talent to supplement our domestic talent pipeline. I want to just, Amy, can you go back one real quick, please? I want to just pause on this to dive a little bit deeper into one piece of this, which is that, as you might imagine, a commission like ours, the first thing we want to start with on the question of workforce, biotechnology workforce of the future is what the federal data tells us today. And I'll admit it was extraordinarily difficult, far too difficult, frankly, for Anne May and our team to get timely, useful data from federal government agencies about the landscape of both the federal government workforce and biotechnology and the non-governmental workforce. We commissioned our own assessment working with an outside data analytics firm, and we found several things that I just want to share. These are in our report, but I think they're important here because they tell a story about the direction of travel for the biotechnology workforce. The first, and this won't surprise anyone on this call, is that the demand for biotechnology talent has grown dramatically in the last 5 years. One of the stats that we like to point to here is that demand for computational and AI-driven biotechnology jobs grew 140% between 2018 and 2024. And my best guess is that into 2025, that demand continued to grow as we saw greater opportunity at the intersection of AI automation and biotechnology. Despite this, supply has not kept up. The assessment that we commissioned said that less than half or fewer than half of the roles in areas such as genomics, molecular engineering, and computational biotechnology are being filled. That has partly to do with the US not producing enough biotechnology graduates. Master's and PhD graduates in genomics are comprising only 56% of what the industry requires. And at the bachelor's level, that number is 37% of graduates who are being trained in AI-driven biotechnology. The other thing I want to just highlight here is that the data shows us that there is not just a deficit in terms of demand versus supply, but also a mismatch in some cases between the needs of the industry and the degrees or credentials that our academic institutions are granting to their graduates. And one of my sort of anecdotal observations over the last 3 years in this role is that there are also significant geographic discrepancies where there might be a concentration of talent or specific skill sets in an area of the United States and a deficit of that same, an oversupply in one area and a deficit in another. This came out pretty acutely at a think tank event that I went to last year, where somebody got up and started talking about how much they needed bioprocess engineers and skilled tradesmen to build biomanufacturing facilities. They were like, I need welders and plumbers. And somebody else in the audience raised their hand and said, well, we have a lot of those in my area. And so I think just an encouragement, I'm getting to a point here, which is to say that on workforce policy, there are things that are completely appropriate for the federal government to do. And those are contained in the NSCEB's recommendations. But so much of smart workforce policy is made at the state, local, and regional levels. And through the kind of conversations like the collaborative is convening today, where we can learn about the sort of geographic distribution of talent and how our institutions are preparing people of all skill levels to meet the needs of their local industry. So maybe just back to where we started, which is to say thank you for gathering this group, and I hope that it generates the opportunity for many offline conversations, because the federal government, as proud as we are of our workforce recommendations, the federal government's reach into workforce policy can be fairly limited. And we see the Commission's recommendations as creating a federal foundation upon which regional, state, and local initiatives can flourish. All right, thank you. And maybe we can move to the next slide. part of the reason that we're so excited about this conversation is because we've been having our own conversations across the country over the last year. Following the NSCEB's publication of its April 25 report, we hit the road, and our commissioners and staff have now traveled to 18 states, with more to come in the next several weeks. And time and again, talent and workforce dominates these conversations. It has been so exciting for our commissioners and staff to hear about the creative ways that communities are training and retraining and upskilling people to join the age of biology. I'll just make a mention here of our desire to have this part of our project culminate in some sharing of best practices and distribution of the knowledge that we've gained through this roadshow initiative. And we're excited that we'll be convening a conversation here in Washington that is essentially a culmination of the roadshow in March. And if we haven't yet made it to your community and you would be open to hosting us, we would warmly welcome invitations and ideas for the next several months. Next slide. I'm sorry, I got ahead. I briefed this slide so we can keep going. Great. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, the commission is a temporary organization. Congress gave us until the end of this calendar year to do our work. And we're going to run through the tape, both here in Washington and in terms of that outreach and engagement that I discussed. We know that many of you have been part of a mission to accelerate biotechnology innovation across the United States well before the commission was created, and many of you have been partners to us over our work in the last 3 years. But we're going to rely again on you to continue, if you believe in what we've put together here and want to help make the case to policymakers in Washington of the need to act on these issues. We, again, would warmly invite you to join our efforts if you haven't yet, and to help advocate to your federal lawmakers about the urgency that we should feel to legislate in this area. There's a question in the chat, which we'll answer in the chat, but just to say, the probably easiest way to get in touch with our team is to email us at ideas@biotech.senate.gov. We regularly monitor that email address, and we'll make sure that the inquiry gets to the right person on our team. So the report is at biotech.senate.gov. Inquiries, or if you want to get in touch, biotech.senate.gov. And I'll conclude my remarks there, but I know that we want to be able to take some questions. So again, let me say how important the NSCEB sees workforce and talent development as a critical aspect of our work. And we're so thrilled to be able to be a part of this conversation. And I'd welcome your questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. And I put the website, which has a very prominent contact us button for the NSCEB, into the chat. We do have a couple of questions. Let me capture the one before I lose it that's in the chat, since we do have a few minutes for Q&A. Based on the panel's research, what career pathways appear most effective for high school and community college students? I will say Philip might revisit some of this in Linnea and others' presentation. Additionally, does the research suggest that biotech employers will be expected to bear primary responsibility for investing in workforce training and upskilling, or is public financing, such as support from community colleges and workforce programs, play a larger role? So any feedback from you, Caitlin, on that, or?
Sure. Let me just start. Maybe I'll give a more general answer than Philip is looking for, but I know that Linnea, Hunter, and John are going to want to come in on that question. In our minds, the best setup here is a true public-private partnership. And by that, I mean not just government and industry, but the three-legged stool of academic and training institutions, industry, and government. And again, by government, I don't just mean the federal government, although, of course, there are plenty. We have some on the call here today of federal government funded efforts to support local and regional workforce development. But we've seen time and again examples of entities that leverage state money or even local incentives to create ecosystems for training. So I think the answer is that, yes, of course, employers are always going to, have primary responsibility for training for their industry specifically or for their company specifically on the job. Like there's no substitute for on the job training as a final aspect of someone's preparation for a role. But there are plenty of community colleges that have robust pacts with local employers so that somebody graduating from a program with a certificate or a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree is immediately employable because they have been trained, with an understanding of the local industry's needs. One of the things that the commission found is that as healthy as that dynamic is, we also, a role that the federal government can play and that regional PACs can play is about the portability of that training and credentialing and making sure that somebody, perhaps they're trained, at a North Carolina community college for employment at a North Carolina, at a local company, but they might want to move someday and they might want to take their career with them. And we think that the federal government can play an important role in facilitating either national or regional credentialing so that the skills and the credentials are more portable.
Oh, that's great. And I know others, John, Hunter, Linnea, have comments, but I think you'll be weaving that into some of your answers so we can revisit that question. Caitlin, this does feel a bit more for you from an anonymous person. Biomanufacturing, you said biomanufacturing is the key to bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., but how do we, the U.S., compete on a global market when operational costs, education, labor, utilities, regulations are substantial competitive disadvantage versus global competitors? So did the commission tackle that at all?
We certainly did. And I think that dynamic is present across the commission's assessment. I mean, we took a very strong focus on the question of regulation, as well as the question of why what are the limitations or why haven't we seen an explosion in biomanufacturing infrastructure built here in the United States vis-a-vis, particularly China, where we are seeing massive investments into biomanufacturing infrastructure for commercial purposes, financed by both state and private capital. And I think at the end of the day, one of the commission found, this is no surprise, that the U.S. has one of the strongest capital markets in the world. But investors have had a hard time seeing the exits for investing in scale up of biomanufacturing and biotechnology. Chapter 2 of our report gets at that issue and the ways that the federal government can be helpful in supporting the scale up of biomanufacturing and the build out of the necessary infrastructure without it necessarily being entirely state or publicly financed. So we called for investment, for example, in pre-commercial scale infrastructure like what BioMADE is working on building for defense relevant biotechnology products, but maybe even more broadly than that, scale up infrastructure run by the Department of Energy or the Department of Commerce for product agnostic technologies. We also called for the government to be a better customer for biotechnology through the use of advanced market commitments and offtake agreements. Not that the government should be the only customer for biotechnologies. That is, probably not an economically sound model, but can the government buy down risk by being a steady and predictable consumer or customer for the products of biotechnology using AMCs and offtake agreements?
Great. And I know we're at time for you and we have a lot to keep into this, so I'm not going to be able to get to every question, but I didn't know if you wanted to at least comment on Hadassah's question at all, if you're able to see it. How does the current workforce undo typecasting when they take the time to upskill but don't show a degree in biogenomics? Um, but
I
rather
want to
just,
get,
yeah,
I
a
can't
degree
see
that,
the question and I want to give it more thought, but I'm based on what you just said, it actually is, I think, a setup for the way I wanted to end my talk, which is
great.
um, don't count out the history majors. Don't, like, please, please, please. I don't know how many of folks that we have an enormous number of people on this call. It's so super exciting to see all the participation. I have no idea what all of your backgrounds are. I'm guessing that many of you are technically trained, and I think that's great. Here on the commission team, I'm around smart, technically trained people all the time. But I am a history major and had no appreciation for this technology when I started this job 3 years ago. It has been an extraordinarily steep learning curve, and I have benefited hugely from people like you teaching me, and I still have a ton to learn. But I just want to remind folks who have a technical background that the sort of mental and emotional hurdle for those of us who aren't technically trained to imagine ourselves as part of this workforce is huge. And I'm probably not going to become a bioprocess engineer, but I hope to continue being an important part of this ecosystem. And so I just invite everyone to think about um, upskilling, reskilling, all of that as not just seeking technical training, but also thinking about how we increase the bioliteracy of people who don't have technical backgrounds but still want to be part of this effort.
Mhm. No,
So
thank you. It's
thank you.
all really important. And thank you for joining us today. I know you're very busy. There's a lot of great information on the website. And just to reiterate from the chat, we have recorded this and we will be following up with that recording to all attendees once it's ready in short order. Please continue to drop questions into the Q&A. Some of these questions might actually be answered to our next round of speakers. So thanks again for helping frame this as we see more the policy landscape and workforce implications we see across the country. So we're going to shift now from this more policy focused discussion, and apologies, I'm navigating a couple of screens here. Um, uh, to dive into a little bit another way the government has really invested in this. So I'm really pleased to introduce John Balchunas, Workforce Director at the National Institute for Innovation and Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals, better known and more simply known as NIIMBL. At NIIMBL, John leads strategy and workforce. I'll make sure you can hear me. Okay, sorry. Leads strategy and workforce talent development for federally funded public-private partnerships, which Caitlin mentioned. These are focused on advancing biopharmaceutical manufacturing in the U.S. His career has been deeply rooted in biopharma workforce and economic development, including leadership roles at the North Carolina State University's Biomanufacturing Training and Education Center and at the North Carolina Biotech Center. He brings a rare perspective that spans industry needs, training systems, and regional workforce ecosystems. And today he's going to talk more about NIIMBL and how they're working to scale some models nationally. We're happy to have you with us, John. Take it away.
Cool. Well, happy to be here, and thanks for having me. And it's great to and humbled to follow NSCEB and Caitlin. I've also just got to put a plug. If you haven't read the NSCEB report, do check it out. And you don't have to read the whole report. And what I always tell people is what's so fascinating about that report is you can skim any couple pages and understand just how urgent the message is around competitiveness with China and everything else. You don't have to read the whole report to get that gist. You can scan a couple pages, and that level of intensity and passion is there the whole way through. And so definitely check it out. Gosh, 8 to 10 minutes isn't enough, and there's already so many things I want to react to that were said already. So I'm going to try not to do that. But just try and give you guys more or less a flavor of NIIMBL, really with the intention that you guys get engaged if you're not already, and if you don't know who we are. My contact info is up there. Find me on LinkedIn. Find me, shoot me an email if there's anything to follow up on, and so forth and so on. But you can go to the next slide. So who is NIIMBL? We are, as was noted, the National Institute for Innovation and Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals. We are a public-private partnership funded by NIST, funded by the U.S. Department of Commerce through NIST. We're one of 17 Manufacturing USA institutes that are all stood up in different sectors of advanced manufacturing. Again, our focus is on biopharma manufacturing and really the manufacturing technologies that underpin the industry. And so we're not there to get new drugs into the market. We're really trying to get those new drugs into the market faster. And so looking at stuff like process intensification and big data and analytics and how do we do that. And so 75% of what we do is way in the technical world and not in my wheelhouse, and it's all around technology innovation, but I lead our workforce and talent development efforts. So that's basically the stuff that we are doing around workforce and talent development to make sure the industry has the workforce it needs, and that's why we're all here today and what we all care about. In terms of our member ecosystem, you can see a bunch of logos up there. In the middle are all of our large industry and government stakeholder members. On the left and right are the large research universities. At the top are small startup companies. At the bottom are our nonprofit members, which consist of community colleges and many of the state bios. I think we're up to actually to about 15, I think, of the state bios are now members of NIIMBL. If that's of interest, I'll mention that in passing again later. Membership is really easy at the nonprofit and especially at the state bio level. It's really just a reciprocal membership. There's no fee associated with that. It's really easy to do. So just ping us if that's of interest. You can go to the next slide. So to kind of talk a little bit about what we care about, I mean, when you look at the big bullets on the left, you're going to see things that resonate with you because it's all, whenever people get together to talk about life science workforce development, the same things keep cropping up. And I'll talk through that in a minute, but it's also worth just noting on the right, how we work. Again, we're a public-private partnership. We are a funding agency, and so we do have money, from the federal government and from our members that we do put out there through numerous different RFPs that we issue throughout the year. But we also just do a really good job at bringing the right people together with industry to have the right kind of conversations through, working groups and conferences and workshops and the whole nine yards. And so that's a big piece of what we do. In terms of, strategy, the way I always tell the story is when we stood up as an institute, a lot of our focus was on that fourth bullet and developing online and in-person training and thinking our focus needed to be getting new short courses started, new degree programs. What we quickly realized, though, as more and more education institutions and more of our industry members joined, was that there's so much good curriculum out there, and there is tremendous resources between all the different states that have already been really engaged in this industry and in workforce development to date. The big problem was that the companies didn't know that the curriculum's out there, and many of the companies didn't know those resources are there. And so there's a story, in the early years of NIIMBL, one of our member companies was shocked to learn that there's a training center 2 miles down the road from where they were, or one of their sites, and they had no clue. And that's a problem. And so how can we help make those connections? And so that became a huge, sort of key piece of what we do. The other thing that happened, though, as more and more of the large companies joined is, they're all screaming for talent and just recognizing that more talent is needed, and not just purely the technical talent. Going back to that message that was made earlier, I mean, the history majors, the English majors, all the computer science majors are all equally important and needed in this industry to drive it forward. And so that's where, some of the bullets at the top became more critical, as we moved on. Also, just from a thought leadership perspective, I think we're doing everything that we can to advance what I'll call novel talent pathways. And, our industry has always been hell-bent on the bachelor's, master's, PhD route being the main pathway into the industry. And I think, that will stay a constant to some extent, but the industry has done a really nice job over the last couple of years embracing stuff like apprenticeships and credentials and micro-credentials and badging and boot camps and other ways of getting folks into the workforce, even 2-year degree programs and so forth. And so that's been really exciting for us. And we're doing everything we can to help break down some of those barriers. The last one I'll touch on just really briefly, though, is down at the bottom in terms of catalyzing cross-regional collaboration. And that's a big challenge, and one that we're really, I think, doing a decent job at doing. And I think there's more work to do. And, I live in, and I'm proud to live in North Carolina. North Carolina has done a really nice job with NC BioImpact and everything else in terms of getting the industry together with the educators and getting true collaboration. Other states are doing just as well in Massachusetts and Texas and Kansas and Oklahoma and Maryland and everywhere. But the problem is nobody likes to talk. I mean, that's economic development, competitive advantage for everybody, and it's going to stay that way because workforce development is inherently regional. But there is a lot of reinventing the wheel and people working in silos as a result of that. And so NIIMBL is really looking at how can we bring people together to better collaborate pre-competitively, because we're all doing the same sorts of things. So how do we do that better? I mean, it's not really competitive if we're all doing it. We're just doing it, on our own. So that remains a huge piece of what we do, and I'll come back to that one at the end. If you can go to the next slide. I'm just going to mention, I'm not going to speak to all these, but what I try to do on this slide is just acknowledge that, the work that we are doing is aligned with the recommendations that are in the NSCEB report, almost the whole way through. And, there's a couple of the big programs that we run on there, like NIIMBL Experience and NIIMBL Biologic. If you're not familiar with those, Google them and look them up. They're, some great programs that we run for freshman and sophomore college students and high school students that we continue to sort of scale and grow, nationally as things go on. I think the two things that I want to mention on this list really quick are, a couple projects that we're working on. One, that first bullet, or sorry, not the first bullet, the fourth bullet, NIIMBL is in the process of standing up a workforce impact assessment framework and really trying to crack the nut on what has been a problem, in any workforce development sector for, since the beginning. And that's every single funding stream has different metrics they care about, but nobody is simply looking holistically at what matters to industry. And so what we have done and are doing is developing an impact assessment framework that will really help practitioners, regional entities, regional economic groups, state bios, everybody really understand what does good look like when it comes to workforce development, programming, and how do you develop effective industry partnerships. And so a set of tools, are being developed, and we'll probably roll those out in the next couple of months, where organizations can leverage this information to better construct programs and better tell the stories of the impact that they're having. So stay tuned for that. And the last one, just in terms of, I mentioned catalyzing new educational initiatives in just sort of pre-competitive collaboration. I have to draw some attention. If you go to the next slide, we're going to be in Puerto Rico in October, and I hope to see as many of you as I possibly can down there. We've been running a national workforce conference for the last couple of years. This will be our third time doing it. It has easily become NIIMBL's #1 ranked event that we run. It even tops our national meeting just in terms of the reviews that come in. This conference has been a game changer. It is, truly about partnership. It is bringing, the regional workforce infrastructure from most of the different states and regions of the US together, along with industry. It's not just sitting around in sessions the whole time. We do, a lot in terms of partnering and unconferencing. And I think what's been really kind of humbling for me is to sit there and watch LinkedIn in the 6 months after we run a conference, when I can see organizations start doing site visits to go visit peers that I know they met at that conference. And so it's been really cool to see. And so the one thing I can say is, like, if you're out there in a state that is, for lack of better words, an emerging region, trying to figure out their game when it comes to life science, economic, and workforce development, be there. I mean, there's no better way to really get a feel for what best practices are out there and who's doing what. And so there's some information on our website about the conference now. Registration won't open up until July. More information will be coming out basically between now and then, but it's a game changer and it's a great opportunity. So if you can go to the last slide. Again, I mean, I think we all know this, innovation in life science and biotech workforce development is going to require a lot. As far as how you guys can get involved, joining NIIMBL is easy. I've got to make that plug, especially for nonprofits and state bios, who I know are, a significant part of this audience. It's really easy. So just ping me if that's of interest. Be there at the conference. And then the other thing I'll just mention is participate in LSWC's Workforce Trends Report. And so I think NIIMBL's happy to be able to sponsor that report this year. Many of you are representing the state bios, and, your participation is critical. There are not many places to get good data, outside of the federal data that's out there in terms of, workforce needs and workforce trends. And so this is a gold mine, and, for right now. So truly, your participation is welcome. And with that, I'm going to stop. And I don't know if we're taking questions at the end.
Thank you, Sean.
Yep.
No, that's great. And thank you for the shout out on the report. We're a data-driven organization, and you can check out our most recent report on our website. But we're very happy to have NIIMBL supporting us and our historic support from Innovate. But we need more and more participation from industry and partners on the ground to ensure that we collect more data that's very relevant, because we get the government data and beyond. Thank you for that plug. And I also, will you keep mentioning state bios, before I introduce Hunter, I just want to do a plug for NC Life Sci and Laura Gunter, who leads that organization, for the work they do convening their community there in partnership with many others across the North Carolina Biotech Center ecosystem. So that's a great best practice. So thanks again for diving into that. So building on that, we're going to hear from on the bioindustrial manufacturing side of the equation next. So I'm pleased to introduce Hunter Brown, Associate Program Manager at BioMADE. Hunter works to expand the biomanufacturing workforce and advance the economic potential of industrial biotech by overseeing the full project lifecycle, from helping design a project calls to managing funded initiatives, with the goal of reshoring advanced biomanufacturing jobs and strengthening the country's leadership in the global bioeconomy. And I'm going to leave it at that just to allow for more time. But thank you, Hunter. We look forward to having you share more about the BioMADE approach when it comes to workforce development in the emerging bioindustrial sector. So over to you.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. Following up on NIIMBL, BioMADE is also one of 17-18 advanced manufacturing institutes. As said, NIIMBL's in the biopharmaceutical space, BioMADE in the bioindustrial space. So on the next slide, what is the bioindustrial space? So we're really talking about the bioindustrial manufacturing of chemicals, of materials, and other products using biological systems. So instead of a petrochemical or petroleum-based feedstock, bioindustrial manufacturing really is leveraging agricultural feedstocks or waste streams to convert via, say, bacteria or yeast into a broad array of end products. On the next slide, so past, say, 30 plus years, there's been immense federal investment into synthetic biology, the deployment and development of genetic tools over the past decades. And really, this has immense potential when we're talking about the commercialization of these tools from the bench R&D scale into the commercial sector. And so we always throw around this term at BioMADE talking about the bioeconomy. But when the potential is as large as 60% of the commercial supply chain, we're really talking about the economy and kind of the whole broad civilian defense applications, full stop. On the next slide, so the United States, as mentioned before, we're well positioned. We have this breadth, depth, background in synthetic biology, genetic tools, and then immense strength in the agricultural sector to really well position the United States. But as Caitlin was mentioning, incredible global competition right now. And so our position is not guaranteed. Immense investments happening in China, Europe, India, elsewhere. And there really is this incredibly limited window to take action to maintain US leadership in this space. On the next slide. So when we talk about chemicals and supply chains, just looking around the room that you're in, a lot of these products are derived from chemicals, and the majority of these chemicals are not made in the United States. Much more likely that they're made by a strategic competitor elsewhere around the globe. And so this is incredibly important for commercial supply chains, but really important for defense supply chains. And so thinking about everything from fighter jets to ships, drones, all capabilities, there's a chemical component, and ensuring that there's a domestic supply of that is really essential for defense applications. So there was a question earlier about how is bioindustrial manufacturing going to scale, and what are some models for that? When you think about how other really critical defense application sectors like semiconductors got their feet under them, there was incredible government offtake initially, 70+%, thinking about Minute-Maid missiles and how the semiconductors took off in the US. And thinking about this from a defense application, the bioindustrial space really is getting the sector stable off the ground. And then on the next slide, looking about other ways that this can expand into the commercial sector. And so we're really talking about a dual-use technology with products not just in defense, but across the commercial sector. There's big applications in PFAS replacements for microelectronics, among many of the other listed commercial applications here. On the next slide, we're really talking about a distributed national bioeconomy. So the BioMADE is in 40+ states with a lot of different projects in all these states and initiatives going on. And this is really not about centralized biomanufacturing. It's really a distributed national bioeconomy with economic windfall across the board. On the next slide. So talking about how do we get this out into the commercial sphere and how do those jobs really start to take off? A big part of this from a workforce lens is right now there's a huge dearth of scale-up capacity and capital assets in the US to do this commercialization work. And so BioMADE has a huge focus on building and filling this critical scale-up infrastructure gap across the country. So from a capital-intensive federal investment, that's a great priority, but there's a huge workforce component to that, where if there's a gap in the pilot demonstration scale facilities in the US, that means there's also a talent pool gap that exists there as well. So BioMADE does a lot of work focusing on what are the differences between R&D workforce, pilot demonstration scale workforce versus commercial workforce. What are the differences? How do we adapt talent pools and training pipelines to these regional areas where these facilities are coming online? So on the next slide, kind of phase one, 3 facilities fully coming in motion in California, Iowa, and Minnesota, but we're really envisioning a 12 to 15 pilot plant network across the entire country to kind of fill this gap, accelerate and improve this commercialization pipeline to really realize the full vision of this economic sector. And so, as I mentioned, a lot of whole of state intervention and action to get these regions prepared and ready for these pilot sites, demonstration scale facilities coming online, but then also the co-location of other industries around these pilot scale facilities to enable accelerated commercialization scale up. On the next slide. So how does BioMADE do this? We really are taking federal dollars and getting them into the hands of the people best positioned to make meaningful, actionable insight into these problems. And so we enable a lot of members across the board. Some of those, over 100 projects at this point across the board, from technology and innovation, as well as education and workforce development. On the next slide, so our education workforce development program really is the full K to gray spectrum. So a lot of early pipeline development, a lot of focus on R1, R2s, as well as community colleges and incumbent workforce, but a huge focus on a critical unmet need, which is the entry and early operators, technicians in the bioindustrial space, to really enable the workers who will commercialize and bring this technology to scale and the jobs that will come with it. And so what does BioMADE do with this? We really make kind of fluid interfaces between industry, academia, and government to ensure everyone has the best knowledge of what the critical unmet needs are, get clear industry buy-in and insight from the onset of curriculum development to ensure once credentials and products are produced, there's industry buy-in across the board, so to ensure they are accepting those credentials and knowing that students are ready to enter the workforce. On the next slide, I'll quickly go through 2 projects that we think exemplify some of this work. There's over 100 plus projects at this point. So one of which, through the Prism Immersive team here and other people on the call, including BCSI, it really is using a new tool such as mixed reality as a way to break down barriers of this CapEx barrier of how do you train people for at-scale bioindustrial manufacturing, millions of dollars to build these facilities. Is there a way to get people accessed and trained as a way to create a kind of scaffolding from the R&D workforce to get some at-scale training before they're able to enter the workforce? And so this is an example of mixed reality, providing micro-credentials and mixed reality that's across the country that gives sort of nascent bioeconomies a leg up as a way to enter the workforce. On the next slide is an example of a whole of state initiative to create bottom-up entire workforce pipelines that bring in all state actors. So this was a great work by the folks at Utah STEM Action, did a phenomenal job of whole of state collaboration across various school districts, the State Board of Education, various universities and community college to really enhance bioliteracy across the entire state. And so again, this is just an example for state bios and others on the call of leveraging BioMADE as an interface to industry, academia, and the federal government and sponsors to bring your whole state coalitions together with some funding, with some insight, subject matter expertise to really point the direction ahead. On the next slide, as I wrap up here, just sort of, again, ways to accelerate all the great work that you're doing is just to tap into these networks to create these seamless flows of information from industry and academia and community colleges who really are doing the phenomenal work on the ground, but maybe need some additional funding or need some additional leveraging of industry expertise across the bioindustrial space. And so a lot of willing and able industry mentors and people willing to dive in and embed themselves on project teams to ensure that your skills, credentials, learning objectives are relevant for today, but also looking to the future, AI, Industry 4.0, lights out manufacturing, where everything is going, how do we prepare to have the workforce ready for that? And with that, I'll end there.
And You can find Hunter's email here, and just go to biomade.org. You can see him and the rest of the team at the website pretty easily. So thank you, Hunter, and particularly that Utah project is very interesting. I think our report has shown time after time industry awareness continues to be a huge issue. So bioliteracy and just introducing the industry as a whole is really critical. Well, thank you for that. And as we move into our final speaker, Linnea, I just want to let our audience know that we are likely going to go over a few minutes. We do not tend to make this a practice, but we heavy loaded with some outstanding speakers for this event, and we want to try and allow Linnea to get through her slides, but also answer some of your questions. So we hope you will be able to stay on. If you can't, this will be recorded and distributed, like I mentioned at the beginning. And finally, Linnea has been answering some questions in the chat, but please feel free to thank you for that, to continue dropping any questions into the chat box or question box at the bottom of your screen. So it's a really helpful perspective, Hunter. So as we transition now, we want to wrap up our implementation perspectives by turning to education and training systems that ultimately really make it possible, which we got a bit of a teaser from Hunter on. So I'm really pleased to introduce a longtime colleague of ours, Linnea Fletcher, who is a nationally recognized leader in the biotech education and workforce development arena and serves as executive director of the InnovATEBIO, the National Biotechnology Education Center. Linnea serves as a PI, principal investigator on multiple NSF-funded initiatives, including NIIMBL, which was renewed for an additional 5 years in 2024. Congratulations. And over her career, she's played a foundational role in building biotech education programs, from launching one of the country's earliest community college biotech programs to helping establish national networks that connect education and industry. And I did drop all the bio links into the chat a bit earlier, so look for those full capped notes for me to see full bios from all of our speakers. With that, I'll turn it over to Linnea. And you're on mute.
And thank you for allowing me to join this group and presenting information on biotech education. And yes, I've started in 1999 with a program at Austin Community College and joined the first center. Now, InnovATEBIO is funded by the National Science Foundation. Our center is located in Austin Community College, but the network is across the nation. And who is InnovATEBIO? InnovATEBIO is over 144 two-year programs that bring biotech training to the nation, and their four-year partners and their high school partners, their industry partners, trade organizations, and of course, we do a lot of work with NIIMBL and BioMADE. And forgive me if I was answering questions in the chat, because I did know some of those answers, because I know those people who are now part of those projects. Next slide.
That's great. We like answers in the chat.
So I just want to mention our goals. You can see them up on the slide. Empowering the community of educators, it's extremely important, and supporting them and others who are involved in biotech education, both formal and informal. And I wanted to mention informal because, yes, bioliteracy, we should be doing more related to that. Several community colleges and museums have biotech programs, and that needs to be increased. And we did help support the Life Science Report for several years, and we're excited that NIIMBL has also now joined us in doing this, because we think it's extremely important. You can't determine what are training programs without knowing what are the emerging trends. Next slide. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our website. If you go to our website, you'll be able to find every biotech program in the United States. You'll be able to learn about all the states. They're listed, and you can click on this, go to the state, and find a program. Next slide. What can you find out about the program? You'll see it in the next slide. You can find out who teaches in the program, what they teach, who are the employers who employ the students. You can find out career paths, because even though we're supposed to focus on the creation of technicians, after over 20 years of creating technicians in these programs, they do not stay as technicians. They move horizontally, vertically in the industry, and even into other industries that are related to biotech. We start with high school, we go to 2-year to 4-year, we even go into graduate programs. If you need to start a program, we have the curriculum, we have the mentoring, we have the resources. Check out our pages on programs. Next slide. The other thing is realizing there is absolutely no way that one centralized organization can meet the needs of the national need for a workforce. We have created hubs. These are all the different hubs based on the needs of the industry and the community. We have an alumni network. We have biomanufacturing, genomics, high school pathways. Check out our hub pages and you can find the experts that you need on these specific topics. Check out our upcoming events. You're all invited to join them. Next slide. An example of 2 of our hubs that we thought we would find interesting is we have a hub that's on biotech careers and entrepreneurship. It has career descriptions that you can share with students, day in the life of stories of these technicians. If people want to know what they do on the job and what are the different jobs, we have videos. And we have a database of over 9,000 companies worldwide and who employs them. The other hub that you'll find interesting, and John knows about this because essentially some of the information at that hub was funded indirectly by NIIMBL, is protocols for NIST CHO cells. Any kind of protocol that you need and cell and gene therapy skills standards. Next slide. Here's essentially, you can scan this to be able to find the information on the hubs, and I know you're getting this presentation. Next slide. This is a national network. This is what we are. We are a networking organization. We may not develop all the curriculum, but we certainly know where it is. We may not have all the mentors, but we know where they are located and we can network you. And even some economic development. If you did not realize, community colleges also do economic development. We have incubators that are associated with their programs at these community colleges. There's an incubator at Austin Community College, and our students work in the incubator. Next slide. If you want to learn more, you want to find mentors, you want to connect to programs, join us. Membership is free, and you'll find us on LinkedIn. And please, if you join us, you'll get our newsletter. And there's a QR code for our website. And that ends my presentation.
No, that's great. And you actually kept us at an hour. We will keep going just to try and answer some of these questions and have a bit of a discussion. And I will, again, just preface this by saying that today was a lot packed into an hour. And the point of these types of programs moving forward is to do a deeper dive. Maybe we one day have one of you all on and we just really deep dive into, InnovATEBIO and partners and stuff like that. So think of today as very much a teaser. Like you, we are also a networking organization and really hope to leverage our connections with state bio, life science associations, and industry to help make sure industry is also at the table. So with that, let's before I go to our wrap-up slide, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and just try and go through some of these questions. So, and I'm not going to even guess who should get what, but did anyone want to take a stab at following up on Caitlin's initial answer to Hadassah's first question under the question and answer box? That gets more into the industry, how does the current workforce undo typecasting when they come and take the time to upscale? So you don't show a degree in biogenomics, but rather they took the time to get it OTJ training or recent certifications. It's difficult for that type of talent to be recognized and rewarded with those new AI and data scientists.
Well, some of that is being recognized through micro-credentials, and then micro-credentials, which can be credit or non-credit, are then modularized and put into curriculum.
Great.
I'm not sure if that answers the
question.
I'm
not entirely. I'm not
sure
entirely
what the question is. Now we do a lot of genomics education, and we do have micro credentials in genomics through NIIMBL.
And Dominique, I'm not going to continue to ignore your question, but I kind of want to wrap with a little bit with that. But if we look at Bryn's question and the follow-up there, when thinking about how to do our own part as biomanufacturing professionals to have discussions with our employers and our local state governments to finance biotech upskill programs and recognize credentialing exams, how would you recommend approaching those conversations with key stakeholders? I'll say one thing is I encourage you to get in touch with your life sciences association in your respective state. There's one in 48 states plus Puerto Rico. They usually have the political network and networks like the people on this call, the panelists on this call, to help kind of act as a neutral convening body and help facilitate those conversations. And your company should be a member anyway. So, but any follow-up to that? Yeah.
I would say that that's one reason we have a database of all the programs in the US. Also, contact your community college, even if it doesn't have a biotech program. And then, of course, through NIIMBL and BioMADE, if it's specific for their area. But essentially, InnovATEBIO and the state bio organizations and the community colleges, which are local, they all work together to go after policy and also identify these. One thing we've done is starting to work with employers who can actually work with our alumni and our students, because the best way to recruit students into programs is for employers to be the recruiting agents. I'm not the best recruiter. You're the best recruiter. And then people of the same age. So industry, we need industry to help with recruiting. I will tell you, just like it was mentioned, that the number one problem for most programs and industry is we do not have the people. We do not have the workforce. You can't walk up to somebody on the street and ask them what biotech is and what are the biotech careers. They have no idea, but they know what a doctor is and a nurse.
That's correct. And just the follow-up she had, what kind of roles do you typically see stakeholders hold? Guys, you're killing me. Linnea's taking everything.
Okay. Yeah.
Go for it, Linnea. Go. Yeah, we got lots of questions.
So. Stakeholders in the companies, or
I think that's how I read it. Yeah.
Well, just like that was pointed out initially, I can tell you right now that the idea of just recruiting from science courses for people to go into the industry is not the best way, because just like Terry Quinzer said on there, who's a co-PI in my grant, we know of people like a ballet person ended up in the industry. There are so many people that have no idea that they would love a job in biotech because it was not portrayed correctly or vividly enough in K through 12. Too many times biotech is reserved for a certain level of students, where I guarantee a welder would love biotech. A machinist would love biotech. An office worker would love biotech, because they only think of the job at the bench. It takes all these people to essentially make the workforce for biotechnology.
And just to chime in, I can chime in really quick on the stakeholder thing, because I think it's worth noting. You need a lot of different stakeholders in any given company, and you need all of their voices, because they all no one voice can speak to everything that you need. And so, for example, talent acquisition knows who they're hiring for. They have their KPIs, their metrics, but so they're a voice, but they're not the key voice. And so nobody is a key voice. Talent acquisition is going to know the jobs they're trying to fill. HR is going to know what those job requirements are. They're the ones writing the job description, so they're important. The site manager of that site is equally important, because he's the one thinking about the overall strategy in terms of their hiring and the levels at which they're hiring. You need everybody sort of at the table, as well as sort of the technical managers that are the ones, leading these teams. So you've got to think broad. And I think the other reason for that is just simply, it's too often that academics or nonprofits will find one champion at a company, and then that champion leaves. That champion retires, something happens, and then everything dies. And so you've got to have your tentacles deep within your.
I hope you don't mind. I'll give you one really good example. So in Austin, I work with startup companies. 2 startup companies knew to hire my students from a 2-year program. A large company, who I will not name, came in and bought them. And because they didn't hire 2-year students, they stopped hiring my students. I, again, had to win that group over for them to start hiring my students. And this story goes over and over again. So even within a company, HR, CEO, managers, they don't see or talk necessarily the same competencies for the job or communicate. We need such that the recognition of who is going to do what job and what are the competencies at all the different levels, and a recognition of who can produce these employees.
No, I completely agree. And I think then I'll just do the call out. Industry needs to be at the table at all levels and find a way to volunteer time if you're in a random position at the company or get your leadership engaged. It's really critical. And I think in the end, a lot of what we all do on this call is relationship building, and maintaining those relationships is a huge piece of what we have to do. But Hunter, I want to give you any final comments from you
No,
from BioMADE?
definitely agree. Yeah, not just the subject matter experts to develop the curriculum, but who holds the purse strings inside the organization, who's the decision makers. Yeah, everyone needs to have a seat at the table to ensure durability as people rotate out, but also dissemination to ensure people are leveraging the great educational resources being developed. They have buy-in from the onset, so they know that the product, the trainees coming out of it are ready, are workforce ready.
Mm-hmm. And I know we still have quite a few questions. I can't get to everything today, so I apologize. But if anything, it's just to say today was a really great teaser to plug in and learn about what we're trying to bring to the table as a collaborative, expand that network for everybody, and hopefully, and look forward to having deeper dive conversations on the work that each of your organizations is doing, and continuing to follow, of course, the NSCEB. So everyone that has registered will receive a follow-up note at the end of this. When I close out this webinar, there is also a survey. I do ask that you take it. But thank you all again for sharing your time, expertise, perspectives, and joining us to contribute in the conversation. What we've heard today really reinforces a clear theme. Workforce readiness is now a competitive issue, and meeting that challenge will require continued alignment across policy, industry, education, workforce systems, and governments at all levels. Today, as I mentioned at the beginning, marks the beginning of a new quarterly series from the collaborative, really designed to create a shared space. And those of you that, if your organization is interested in becoming a collaborator with us, please reach out to us at connect@lifesciencesworkforce.org. And you can see our socials on here and our email. We can discuss how you can start to get engaged. Again, we encourage you to share that you participated, reshare from follow our LinkedIn and other social platforms, and share when we share. We had a great article we shared from BioWorld Today yesterday, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue and working together to strengthen the life sciences workforce. So have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us.